All right, here we go. Hey, everybody, this is John Barrows with Make It Happen Monday. Happy Monday. Hopefully, you all had a fantastic weekend. I'm on today with Chris Pepin from Magnaco, and we're going to talk today about owning your career path. So, Chris, you want to give everybody a quick little intro and background on you and kind of where you're coming from and what Magnaco is all about?
Sure. So my name's Chris Pepin. I'm the founder and managing partner here at Magnanimous Consulting, or Magnaco for short. If you have any other questions, you can reach me by my initial CP at magnaco.com. But I've been a career salesperson, really passionate about the industry, found my way into the coolest job I never knew existed, which is selling salespeople to salespeople. So we
Yes.
recruit salespeople for software companies, and it's really great. We absolutely enjoy the dynamic and the characters we get to work with. We really enjoy being, taking a little part of that Silicon Valley dream and plugging people into the right place. And our specialty really is we deal with the top 10% companies, and we deal with the top 10% of people. So we've really found this good layer where our job basically is to qualify the right companies, qualify the right people, and then remove the barriers. So it's really just like any good sale.
Yeah.
It's 90% of the way there by the time you pick up the phone. And then we just remove the constraints to a good match happening and help people accelerate their career path.
Love it, man. Yeah, it was funny when I when I sold my company and then started a Basho, which was the originators of this training. When I similar to you, when I realized I could sell sales training to sales reps, I was like, wait a minute, this is kind of like being a crackhead selling crack to crackheads. I'm like, this is fantastic. I'm like, there's no problem, right? So it's some good stuff.
It's way fun because there's just that bond that salespeople have with one another. There's that whole, I've gotten my ass kicked relentlessly since I got in and still have a sense of humor about it kind of people that we enjoy it. And frankly, we play it ourselves as well. So there's definitely a good bit of rejection even in our end of the world.
Yes, indeed. Cool. Well, we had met up at Rainmaker, right? I think it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, actually, we did both. There was the San Francisco weekend before, and then, we had back-to-back weekends together there.
Yeah, and I think that's what kind of prompted this discussion, which was, just career paths, right? Because I get a lot of kids asking me questions. Hey, John, what should I do with my career? Like, where should I go? And, and I'd love to talk to you kind of from your side of the house, what you're seeing on a bunch of different topics, because one of the things I keep noticing is that people are in a big rush to get to that next step, and they're using kind of the SDR or kind of that entry level position as a stepping stone, but it's almost like, next. And a stat that really stuck out to me recently, Trish Bertuzzi over at the Bridge Group, they do some awesome reporting and stuff. And they came out with one that said recently that, if you get promoted from an SDR to an AE, right? If you get promoted in less than 6 months, the stats were something like there was like a 57% or 53% failure rate on SDR to AE. Whereas if the SDR stood in for 18 months, right, year and a half, the failure rate was something like 6%. So the difference was absolutely astounding to me. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world, but talk to me about, how you see specifically the SDR role and the power of patience and really how realistically, how long should a rep be sitting in that role, or what should their mentality be in that role before getting to that next one? Let's start there.
Well, I'll tell you another similar stat. As a company founder, the majority of successful companies are founded by people between like 28 and 32 who are coming from a company. They've worked together with their co-founders and they build it from there. So surprisingly enough, there's a lot of places where the unicorn story you hear about is actually, just the path of death for most people. You've got to have those fundamentals. And I think what's important to look at, especially coming into the SDR world, is I would focus on your fundamental traits more than anything else. So, there's certain core traits that make a good salesperson that really attract you in. And I think feeding those traits and really understanding those traits through training, through practice, it builds this core strength, so to speak, around your skill set. That is very difficult to stop. And these are the things that, we hammer our people on relentlessly, which is, the prospecting, the really fine tuning, figuring out what you do, and just kind of at least reaching a level of unconscious competence before you even consider anything else. You better be unconsciously competent, as opposed to looking at the clock, which is like, oh, it's been 6 months, it's time to promote. Where, you know, really, what makes a great VP of sales? You know, what would they say? You know what I mean? Look at the people a level or two ahead of where you want to be, and they'll all back what Trish Bertuzzi's talking about. And frankly, you know, we were talking earlier, I did the same thing with I was a salesperson for 6 years, knocking doors relentlessly, until I really allowed myself to launch into this kind of world.
And kind of brings an interesting thing that I always take a look at, or at least I recommend to kids who are asking me about there, because they always, you know, hey, John, I'm in this role, I'm not happy with it, right? I'm looking for my next role. And my question to them is always, well, what's your plan? You know, I always used to roll my eyes at that question, you know, 5 years, you know, in the interview, like, where do you want to be in 5 years? And I used to kind of roll my eyes at that, you know, and obviously that question is geared towards the company, like, where do you want to be at this company? But now at 42 years old, you know, I think that 5-year question is actually a really important question, but not necessarily at that company. I say, what do you want your lifestyle to look like in 5 years? Right. And then based on that lifestyle, what kind of family, house, car, those type of things, and then back into it and say, okay, well, then how much money do I need to be able to make to get there? And then based on that, what job do I need to get to be able to help me to get to that point? Right. Because inevitably for me, like, look, I'll eat a shit sandwich for a year or two in a really shitty job if it's going to get me and build my skill sets or get me to learn something or get me to that next stage that's going to help me reach my ultimate goal. But if I don't have kind of a big picture, long-term goal, then I'm just going to kind of bounce from job to job to job and be unhappy and keep searching for that happiness, if you will, without a plan. And so what's your advice to that 22, 23, 24, 25-year-old kid? Because I didn't really have that perspective until I was in my 40s, right? I mean, I just kind of grinded it out and did my job. And I think my dad really kind of instilled upon me, like, hey, earn it. You know, make sure you earn it before asking for anything. And to your point, like, over exceed your role, and then you'll get the promotion. But I think today's generation's a lot less patient, if you will, because they've seen kind of, to your point, the unicorn, the success of that person who was on YouTube. And so it's like, hey, I want to get to that next level. So how do you coach kids who are kind of 22 to 26 years old on their careers, not just this job?
Yeah, and that goes back to, frankly, like, there's a lot of the Jim Rohn kind of stuff that I listened to early on that I know a lot of those kind of those core fundamentals. And a principle that's really important is you'll find that your best days weren't the days where everything went your way. It was where you gave it everything you had, and at the end of the day, regardless of the outcome, you can just say, "Man, look at what I built." And it's kind of that way with your career too. Happiness is not, sometimes you don't get good by being happy. I mean, let's face it, right? But it's an investment. So we have something here in our company that we call the suck. Somewhere between 2 to 6 months in, everything will suck. It just will. And we call it that. And it's kind of like a baptism point where you just go through, just nothing works, and you're giving it your all, and once you get on the other side of that, just things start clicking and coming together. But if you're not willing to endure the suck, you're not able to earn the next level. So I think the challenge is when you're early on, you haven't been through enough of those kind of cycles of suck that we all go through. And so I think it's really important to it's really important to have enough patience with yourself and enough awareness that, hey, is this a cycle of suck, or does this really suck? You know what I mean? And that's kind of that bounce point where people tend to go through. I mean, it can take 2 to 3 sales development roles because you don't really know what you don't like. You don't know what a good manager, a good leader is or looks like. That's where you really, you don't know what good training looks like until you've been through enough of it. So I think it's about, do you like the people you're with? Do you like their ethics? Do you share the same values? Do they care enough about your results? And do you care, most importantly, enough about your results to really put it in and understand that sometimes happiness and progression don't align together, and that's okay.
Well, and that actually, so because I think there's a point in almost everybody's career where at first you're looking for a job, you're asking for somebody else's permission, and you're interviewing for all these jobs hoping that somebody, but then after you get some of that experience, you start to flip it around and you start interviewing companies, right? Where,
Right.
I recommend, like, to your point, like their morals, their ethics, like go and look in their mission and vision statement, go follow some of their stuff and see, especially after you've learned a little bit, maybe in your 20s, like, close to your 30s, that's when you start selectively going after companies, and don't submit your resume, right? Literally almost, what I train, which is, prospecting, fire off an email to the CEO and say, hey, I'm looking for the next challenge in my career. I was on your website. I noticed your mission is to blah, blah, blah. And it really aligns with a lot of my, who can I have that conversation with about your business? Like that approach. When does that tend to happen? When do you see that tending to happen with all the people that you interview? Is there kind of a point where they do that, or should they be doing that sooner rather than later? Kind of, what are your thoughts on that?
So it can take, one or two roles to figure out what works and what doesn't. And then there's also, frankly, in software, a lot of factors. You can come in at a 50-person Series A company as one of the first couple SDRs, and the whole thing can grow or blow up on you, and you don't even, you just, again, it's really really difficult, and that's what makes it awesome, and that's what makes these guys heroes, right?
Yeah, right.
So there isn't like there's no cheat sheet on this. You've got to have this will, and that's why I'm saying it's a trait. You can't train it.
No.
You've got to have this will to really want to make your mark within the software industry, and I think it's also about, it's kind of like a mental side of, you want to pull the results to you, through your actions, as opposed to pursuing or leaning into it, or always, wanting more. I think having a solid stance in your work base and just pull that next opportunity to you, whatever it may be. This is the Jim Rohn thing, was that you will always get paid what you're worth. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a job and you're working your butt off and you're doubling everybody, and for whatever reason, there's a manager issue, or there's a non-reward issue, or somebody gets promoted around you because they've been there longer and they shouldn't have, you will still find a way to earn what you're worth. Maybe not in that company, maybe that is the next move. Mm-hmm. But by standing on, hey, even if you're in a place that just, there's some very large companies where it's just a meat grinder, and they just grind people out and run them through. And we love to find the guys that were successful anyway, and everybody knows it's a meat grinder, but they did it anyway, and here's what I want next, and here's these expectations I have from management, and we can kick them up 20-30% in terms of their base salary just on that second move if they're the right guy. Right. So it's one of those funny things where it's like, winning first place isn't necessarily the key to success. I forget who I was talking to this weekend, but like, the person that wins American Idol isn't necessarily the one that goes on with the biggest career, right? Yep. So there's kind of that, I've got this goal to be the number one in my division, and it doesn't work, but you put it all in, and you get the skills, and you put in those hours, and you put up the numbers, and you just move right on into something completely awesome that nobody else is looking at. So we do that all the time with folks.
I love it. And it actually brings up something you brought up earlier, which is the whole consciously or unconsciously competent, right? And for those who don't, I forget who came up with it, but it's like, at first you start, you're unconsciously incompetent, you don't know what you don't know. Then you're consciously incompetent, you know what you don't know. Then you're consciously consciously incompetent, and then you're consciously competent, you know what you know, and then you're unconsciously competent.
Yeah, then you go back into it again. Right. Yeah, and you cycle through that.
And it's funny because I always said that, the best sales, or the best managers, not necessarily the best sales reps, the best managers aren't necessarily the unconsciously competent ones. They're actually the consciously competent ones. They're not maybe the best sales rep who just wakes up and knows how to have that conversation, or, has that internal drive that you can't teach. But it's that maybe B+ A- sales rep that can tell you, hey, this is exactly why I missed my number, or here's where I lost it, and they have a process that they can define. And again, maybe they're not the most, charismatic person on the planet, but they can explain it to you. Right. So how much do you look for in that? Like when clients are asking questions, how much do they look for your attitude compared to your process?
So winning is a habit, and it starts long before your first sales quota. And our clients specifically look for this. I don't want to name names, but we've got, some very substantial clientele. and they're looking for the run up. I mean, they don't even, they'll hire a school teacher and turn them into an incredible SDR if that school teacher knows how they want to win, why they want to win, how to hold themselves accountable, the process of why they want to go into sales, which isn't I like people. It's I want to win this thing. This is, what I mean? This is what I want to do. I want to be very tactical about it. So those kinds of things, I think that winning ahead of it is really important. Playing competitive sport. I just talked to an AE we were recruiting the other day I asked him, okay, so what are some competitive things you do? He totally lit up. It turns out he's a weekend race car driver and wrenches on his own MR2. And I'm like, for one, it was fun to geek out on cars with somebody, but for two, this is a real competitor. He wants to go out and crush things, right? And so that has nothing to do with the fact that he's been in a role for maybe 4 or 5 months, and it may not, you know what I mean? Like that winning attitude, that's a habit. Yeah. That's a trait. Same thing with excuses are a habit and a trait, man. And we can find them in a heartbeat. We know what they look like. The people that, I think Tony Robbins calls it the shoulding. You just should all over yourself. You're just shoulding constantly. We don't want anybody with a bad case of the shoulds. Yeah. So, these are things that are, A players hire A players. So when you're surrounded by them, B players hire C players because they need to keep their place. Mm-hmm. So we know that mentality, and we know the aspiration for that mentality, and frankly, it doesn't always show itself as quota. So we're always looking past that. Where are you dominating elsewhere? Like, tell me what's going on.
Yeah, that's a right in line, man. One of my favorite questions to ask in interviews is, what are you passionate about? And by the way, I don't care what you're passionate about. What I mean? I care on how you explain what you're passionate about, right? Because if you're like, oh, I really enjoy customers and I want to make sure they're, get the best services. It's like, what? That's what you're passionate about. Dead. Versus, holy shit, are you kidding me right now? The Bruins are going into the playoffs right now. They just lost 4 out of 5. If they don't get their shit together, they're going to lose in the first round. It's going to be embarrassing because they picked up Nash this year and they were supposed to go all the way. I had no expectations. You know what I mean? And if they, even if the Bruins has nothing to do with what we're here to talk about as far as your career is concerned, the way that you explain that to me tells me everything I know, because I can teach skill, I can teach process, I can teach technique. What I cannot teach is drive and passion, right?
It defies logic. Yeah. Sports fan, there's no logic in sport. You know what I mean? I'm just not ever going to convince somebody from, forgive me, you lovable massholes, to root for anything out of Florida ever. Nope. Never going to happen. This is, but that's the separation of church and state. Like, they should have some kind of church level. This is it. And you know what I mean? Like, and actually be able to turn that into something fun and productive and useful. Like, that's the trait versus the skill and the talk track and all those other things, which we can teach.
Exactly. Some tactical things here. We chatted real brief before we got on here, which was, what's the threshold these days, right? Because I've been out of the recruiting game. I've been out of the hiring game for quite a while. I mean, I just picked up Morgan, but I think that was a little bit of a different situation. But, what's the threshold these days as an employer, specifically in the SaaS world? Because I think they're a little bit more open to, okay, I get it. You've had a few jobs here. But when do people start paying attention to how many jobs you've had in how many years, and that start being a negative? And I know there's a lot of variables involved here, but is there kind of where you all of a sudden you're like, oh man, this guy, I'm not going to be able to place this guy anywhere because, right, he's been at 5 jobs in the past 2 years. I mean, that's extreme, but.
So early, when we're talking early on, it's okay to have, you got your 4-monther out of college and that didn't work, or you did, one of these, Fortune 1000 tech companies that, was a grinder and really spit you out. So there can be a couple of those if you're willing to stay within that SDR realm until you get like a really good meaty 18 months, hitting kind of thing. It's okay to have 2 or 3. I think from there, and some people go career inside sales too. Right. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I know a really, really great guy out in San Francisco that we've worked with he's probably in his 40s and he's just killer at it and he loves it. And so there's nothing wrong with that either, because he makes himself a wonderful living doing it. But I would say, the average tenure in software is 2.7 years. Okay. So we look for better than that. So if you've had three jobs in the last 5 years, It's kind of iffy, right? Especially if those three jobs are all at, under 200 person startups, and then the long tenures were at, a 7 years at an IBM or something like that. So there is a difference where we want, depending on our client, which is, those specs range all over the place. But for our smaller companies, they want people that have worked in the startup world, and we understand that, hey, they missed a round. But we were talking to a guy the other day who he was one of the last guys to leave. So we knew that his company was failing out, but he absolutely believed in the tech and stayed until. So you know what I mean? The fact that only lasted 2 years, but he was the last guy at the door. So there's like a lot of variables there. But generally speaking, we want averages of 3 years plus. Okay. So if you look over the last 10 years, we would expect to see that. And if you're in like a lot of change, then really, I mean, that career step it's a big responsibility on the candidate. It's your career. This is your value. So you have to make these steps carefully. And frankly, it takes a couple missteps to get there. So everybody understands, everybody's been through it.
Yeah, and you got to figure it out. And that leads me to another question, which is, say you are that rep, because shit happens, right? You get a job, they paint this beautiful picture for you. You walk in, the manager's an asshole. They have no processes. Like, they switch their comp plans on a monthly basis. Right. And it's a meat grinder, and you can tell, right? So look, a couple times you take a few swings and misses, right? So you do have those 3 years. What I always found this interesting, because I'm always a transparency, honest guy, but I also am not an excuse guy, right? I always want to. So when you're asking that kid who has 2, 3, 4 jobs in a relatively short period of time, how do they answer those questions? Like say your boss was a dick, like legitimately a dick, and you tried to work with them, right? What's the answer that satisfies you when you ask me, John, why'd you leave your most recent position? You were only there 6, 7, 8 months. And my gut, if you and I were drinking a beer, I'd be like, well, because my manager was a straight up asshole. They flat out lied to me. But as a person interviewing you, I could easily see that as, this is an excuse. This is a kid who's whining about shit. So What's the answer you want to see, or employers they want to see when that real bad shit actually happens?
Well, so there's the Massachusetts answer, and then there's the diplomatic answer I expect from everybody else outside of Massachusetts. So I'll give you a little leeway there. You know what I mean? Like, there is a certain, I think, amount. There's that diplomatic language that it takes a little bit in your career to be able to learn. So I like to look for that on how are they able to tell me that, while actually, that's kind of a really good soft skill that doesn't necessarily show up in quota. So I do pay attention to the soft skills around that. Yep. In terms of that language, but outside of that, it's really it's about what did you learn and being able to articulate that. So I don't care that the first one was a family friend that introduced you and they weren't really going, and then you got recruited in the second one, and the manager that recruited you didn't tell you that they already were in the process of being acquired and the acquiring. You know what I mean? Like, there's stuff like that, right? But hey, here's what happened, and here's what I really want. So there's a great rep that we hired 3 years ago who had like 3 jobs in 3 years. And he's been in his same job that we put him in now for the last 3 years in Boston, of all places. But he was like a competitive soccer coach. He had all this great competitive stuff. He put up the big numbers, but he said, here's the deal. This is what I learned at this company. This is what I learned. This is what I'm looking for. This is the kind of organization I want to work. These are the kinds of questions I need to talk to the others on the team and sniff it out. So this guy really got smart about it, where, hey, I need to talk to some other reps that are doing this so I can sniff out what's happening. So I don't think getting burned or having a couple of those short experiences is the problem. It's more a matter of, I want to make sure this never happens again. And these are the things and there's that confidence there. There's that step that they've got, right, where they just say, here's what's required. Here's why I'm not talking to and they start really drilling me on the value of the client. I love that. Yeah. We absolutely, because then you're at that point of professionalism again, where we're talking about soft skills, things outside of your quota that they really need, and they've got that savvy. Managers love that, because managers want somebody who knows how to be managed. They know, hey, this works, this doesn't. We need some process, but I also don't need the micromanagement style. Or actually, I really like the micromanagement style. And there's great companies for people that want to like geek out on metrics and details and things. So we're able to tailor the right job opportunity for that.
Very cool. Yeah, I think it's also important to kind of, I think eventually, and this doesn't happen, I don't think until later either, but really understand where you fit. It's like, to your point, some career SDRs, like there are some people that just really enjoy that role, and it doesn't have to be that stepping stone role. It's like, hey, I'm great at inside, qualifying and doing that type of stuff. And, I just put a post out there on, the downside of an acquisition when my company was purchased by Staples. And it was one of those things where, I thought, so I knew I wasn't a corporate guy. I went corporate because that's what I was supposed to do first couple of years, I was Black & Decker, then Xerox. And I got into startups, but not because I wanted to be in startups. It's because a friend of mine had started a company. And that's when I kind of caught the bug. And I've always said, like, I'm not the risk taker in the sense of drop everything, live in mom's basement, eat ramen noodles and see what happens. Like I'm a calculated risk guy. So there needs to be at least something in place there for me to make that jump. Mm-hmm. But I'll make that jump more than most people will. Right. But, I'm a second guy, right? In the sense that if you're the first guy that comes up with that idea, I'm the second guy that'll come in and help you execute the shit out of it. But then once it reaches a point of like, all right, now we're this big, I don't like that anymore. You know what I mean? Right. So what do you see people kind of, at what stage of their career do you start seeing people who understand kind of where they fit? Like I'm a VP of sales for companies between 10 and 50 million, but once they get to 50, I'm out, right? Or I'm an IPO guy or whatever. Like where do people start to really understand that?
12 to 14 years.
Okay.
Yeah, we see it really happen there because by then we're on like job number, 4 to 6, something like that. And that's really where somebody says, look, I'll find somebody at like take a Hortonworks and they're like, yeah, I was employee number 127. Right. Well, I want to do it again. Right. Or I was actually really happy when we were this size or whatever. So you have to have a couple ones, and yeah, it takes maybe 4 to 6, maybe not. The other downside, John, is you could have it and not know it because you haven't had enough. So you could be at the best, one of the best companies ever, and you don't know it, and so that's the other scary part, frankly, that takes some getting beaten up. And I don't know. I was kind of thinking as you were describing this. Do you remember that phase early in your career where you were very, very relentless about setting goals and you could not hit or figure out a goal to save your life? Like there's that period you have to go through, right? Yeah. Where you're always setting goals and you've got these goals. Vision boards, you're detailed on your goals and you're just all over the board. But that process, right, of setting goals, eventually over 5 to 10 years, you get really good at it and what not to set, what works for you. And then you're able to kind of really steer a lot better. Yeah. So that's kind of something to consider as well, is that, look, your job is to get good. Your job is to get experience, respect the team you're on, and give it every single bit you've got. If you leave the job and you've laid it all out on the line and you've got nothing left to give, move on. Right. It's totally fine. But you know what I mean? If you're still saving it, if you still got something in the tank every time you bounce, it's going to catch up to you, right? Yeah. But if you run the tank all the way to E and you give it all you got, man, then you can confidently have that breakup and move forward. Or, you know what I mean? Or if you're finding what's really missing and you're not you've got this unquenchable thirst for knowledge and managing and coaching and you're not getting it, absolutely move on. If you're not getting guided and coached and that you're putting it in and they just don't have time for you, because I had an SDR role like that where they didn't have any time for me. Right. I left and wound up the next company I went to. We got like number 3 on the Inc. 500. So you know what I mean? Like it was kind of like, hey, gave this all I could. There wasn't much left. I'm just going to bounce and see what happens. And boom, it just we had something that blew up wonderfully.
Nice, awesome, man. Well, this has been a great conversation. I think my takeaways are definitely still be long-term focused on your career, right? I mean, it always blows me away. You got a 40, 50-year career ahead of you. Don't be in such a rush to get to that next step, because eventually you do reach a plateau and all of a sudden you stay in that plateau for too long and it starts to get itchy and boring. So master it, do everything that you can to exceed that, and then have the right attitude, right? And be driven to be successful, as opposed to always looking for what's next.
At the end of the day, that's it. So if you take sales as a profession, as a real vocation, you got to understand sales is the highest paid job in the world, the highest paid people in the world, all possess sales skills. And it's probably one of the lowest average incomes in the world too, because the difference is so wide, right? So, your average salesperson income, you look on a list, it sucks. But you look at the highest people in the world, they've all got that. Why is that? Because, man, if you get it right and you get those fundamentals down and you don't half-ass it in the early phase, no matter what, the results are just so much fun. And the toys are so cool. And the things you get to do with other sales guys when you're at the top of your company, just those experiences, John, we can't talk about these things publicly, but man, is there some fun stuff that, accounting may or may not know about. So it is just a blast. And the difference between first and second place isn't that big in terms of effort. It just requires everything you got.
Yeah, I think I have always said sales is the greatest profession in the world for a lot of reasons, but a big one is because if you do it right, you have a lot more control over your career than other professions. You know what I mean? Like once you really get sales right, you can start to dictate the path more than just waiting for your merit raise and being there for 5 years and that type of shit. The opportunity is pretty much limitless if you're great at it, but you got to put the work in up front.
If you do it, it's also one of the lowest stress positions out there. If you look in terms of job stress, it's a very, very low stress position once you've got those fundamentals done and once you've really handled it. Because again, once you've been punched every way you can be punched 16 times, it doesn't really affect you anymore. And just stuff that would crush your day is kind of like, all right, can we get this out of the way before breakfast? And so it's really, man, just the level of confidence and mastery you get to obtain over your whole life. Is really, really something. I mean, we always focus on quality of life in every position we work, and there's definitely heaps of it for those that are willing to work for it.
Awesome.
So, dude, I'm glad to make it happen with you this Monday. This was super fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we could have this conversation for another couple hours here, but we do have to cut it short because we all got jobs to do and stuff to get back to. But Chris, tell everybody how they can get in touch with you. I know you got some incredible opportunities going on right now.
Yeah, we do.
No names of companies or not, but I know there's a lot of hiring going on your side. So how do people get in touch with you? How do people follow you? That type of stuff.
So directly just cp@magnaco.com. You can go to magnanimousconsulting.com or magnaco.com, and that'll get you to our website. We don't have a lot of jobs posted because they come and go really fast. And frankly, our recruiting is so outbound. I just don't have the socials in place. Frankly, we haven't needed them because we're working our list and we're really dug into our niche. But yes, cp@magnaco.com. That's Chris Pepin. And MAGNACO is the short. I think that'll pretty much get you. Hit me on the inbox and we'll figure out the rest from there. Perfect. So I'll get people routed into the right person on the team here.
Awesome, Chris. Well, I'm sure
LinkedIn is great too.
What's that?
Yeah, don't forget LinkedIn. Yeah, we're all over that.
Definitely. And I'll put those links in the Facebook chat thing here, but also for those of you on the podcast, listen in and again, join us every Friday. We also do this on a Facebook group on the J Barrows Make It Happen page where we do actually a Friday happy hour. So similar situation to this. So make sure you join us there. If you have, reps who are looking for jobs, it's a great way to collaborate and communicate with people. So awesome talking to you, Chris. I really appreciate it. And until next time, everybody, make it happen. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Later.